Welcome back to day 2 of the Texas Fatherhood Summit. We're so excited to have everyone rejoin us, and thank you for those who are joining us for the first time today. It's a really special day. When we plan the Fatherhood Summit, we typically plan it around Father's Day to commemorate and celebrate the wonderful dads throughout our state and country. But today is also a celebration of Juneteenth, which I'm sure that you are all excited, like I am, that this has finally been recognized at a national level to celebrate this really important day of independence for all Americans. So it's a special day, and we're glad that you've chosen to be here with us. We are going to focus on a really important topic today, co-parenting. It's a topic that I pay a lot of attention to because I'm very interested in the relationships between moms and dads, because their relationship is actually the single greatest predictor of fathers' involvement with their children. And so, because at the end of the day, I really care about children's well-being, I focus a lot on the co-parenting relationship. But just like yesterday, we're going to bring you folks who really are engaged in this in ways much broader than I am. We will have a panel today that, just like yesterday, will include the voices of fathers, will include the voices of research experts, and providers who do their really innovative strategies to try and build those co-parenting relationships. But we also are so lucky to have our keynote speaker today, Dr. James Mchale. And he's a professor of psychology at the University of South Florida, who we beat in baseball just this past week, and will now be going to the Baseball World Series, and they're not. But that aside, we are really excited to have him share with us his research on co-parenting. He directs the Family Studies Center at the University of South Florida, and is really a national expert in helping us to understand healthy co-parenting relationships that are child-centered. So I'm so excited to introduce Dr. James Mchale and look forward to hearing your comments. James, thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm really glad to be here, Cynthia, and especially to follow on the heels of yesterday. It's always a real treat to hear Joe Jones talk, and I learned a great deal just from the chat and the contributions of the panelists and people who are in the audience. And it's terrific. It's a really terrific group of individuals who have come to this conference. Everyone who's out there doing the work is here, and I want to make sure I stay in my lane today, right? So I'm not Joe, I'm not you, I'm not some of the others who are on the call, but I do think I have some value added to contribute today in talking about co-parenting in the way that we've always understood it in the research, but also in the direct clinical work that we do here at the Family Studies Center at the University of South Florida. So I'm going to ask our friends to put the slides up there, and we'll move through a slideshow together, and then I understand we've got some time at the end to have some dialogue and some discussion back and forth. I would say just one last thing, that we've got policy experts, we've got fatherhood experts, we've got in the field experts. I'm a family therapist by training, and so I come to this from having worked with lots of diverse families in all kinds of circumstances, and really the up close work. And so that's the lens that I bring, and I think you'll hear and see some of that in what we talk about today. And my hope is that what we talk about today will linger a little bit in the later sessions today, even as we talk about co-parenting from the frames of the contributors who are here. So if we can put the slideshow up there, we can get moving. I'm right now seeing the slideshow. Okay, you've got it all queued up, ready to go. We're not going to linger too long on the first slide, but I did want to let you know that I'm talking to you from Pinellas County, Florida, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Pinellas County in a little bit. We have been operating here for about the past 18 years. It's an interesting center. There are not too many centers in the United States that have the same mission that we do. All of the work that we do here since the very inception has been focused on understanding co-parenting in diverse family systems. We'll spend a lot of time talking today about mothers and fathers, and toward the later part of the talk, unmarried mothers and fathers. But we do try to understand co-parenting in every family system, no matter who the child's co-parents are, here in Pinellas County, throughout the state of Florida, throughout the United States, around the world. We have the adage here that every child is co-parented, and for us, co-parenting will often mean the child's biological mother and father, but for the child, it's really the collection of adults who are the most involved in their lives. So let's show the next slide. This is a research presentation, a research-based presentation, and there are a number of different projects that we've run over the years that are relevant to what I'll be talking about today. But sometimes research gets seen as something happens at the university, you take it, you bring it into the community, and that's not a very helpful metaphor or very helpful model for citizens. So I'll be talking about research, but all of the research we'll talk about today is community-based research, and I think you'll get a better handle on that as we go. Next slide. The center here does work with unmarried mothers and fathers, with married mothers and fathers, with post-divorce mother and father, with multi-generational family systems, with biological foster family systems. And so our real ambition is to try to really help to unlock the processes within families and family collectives, whatever they might look like, for any given child that best supports that child's social and emotional development. So the co-parenting metaphor is behind all that we do. Next slide. There are 2 or 3 slides that I want to linger on today, and for us today, there's many different ways of thinking about co-parenting. Sort of the legal definition is something we focused on heavily yesterday. For us here, remember my background as a family therapist, and for us, I want you to keep in mind we're talking about co-parenting as the mutual, joint efforts of adults raising children for whom they share responsibility. Just a few potential co-parenting systems depicted on the screen here. Many, many more co-parenting systems. This would look differently if you're in Brazil or Vietnam or India or somewhere else and thinking about who the child's active co-parents are. But for us today, again, I'm going to try to keep us squarely focused on fathers and mothers because that's a big theme, the main theme of our conference here. Next slide. This is the slide I want to linger on for a few minutes because I think if you can carry this with you throughout the day today as you talk further about co-parenting, I think you'll really get the gist of why I'm here with you today and how I want folks to remember what I have to say. These are, for me, the essential tenets of healthy co-parenting in any family system around the world, no matter who the co-parenting adults are, that best support children's emotional health. And again, for me, co-parenting and for the work that we do here, co-parenting is really about the child and the child's emotional health and development. To the extent that there is support and solidarity between the parenting figures, I think that's the one that comes to mind most readily for most of us. The adults have each other's back, they're supporting each other, they're communicating. They are on the same page is often how that gets spoken about. The others, maybe a little bit less often, but equally important for the child. So consistency and predictability is the next one. There's so many different ways that we think about this, but if we're thinking about non-residential co-parents and child having one set of experiences with one parent and another set of experiences with the other, almost all of our work here at the Family Study Center is with children birth to age 5, although certainly co-parenting is an every child metaphor throughout the lifespan. And so particularly for younger children, when there is inconsistency in what they can expect across different settings, that can be very difficult and challenging for very young children who are trying to have some predictability and consistency in the environment to help promote self-regulation. We often talk about consistency as being important from an individual parent with that child to try to help promote security and predictability, but equally important is the degree to which there's consistency and stability across households. If at one house there's no bedtime, in the other house bedtime's 7 o'clock, you can play computer games all you want over here and not over here. The older kids, obviously not babies, but if a child who's been placed in foster care is allowed by the foster parents to use a pacifier, and then she goes back home to stay and have overnights with her parents in the hopes of reunification, and the parents have never used a pacifier and don't believe in it, and the child has become acclimated to that, the child gets upset, dysregulated. Parents are not using a pacifier, not because they're bad parents, it's not part of their philosophy. Child goes back to the foster parents, not having slept, being a little bit cranky, and then people start worrying, maybe this reunification is not going to work. And it's about a pacifier, the lack of consistency and predictability across settings. Really important for the child to have as much of that as possible. It doesn't mean mom and dad have to behave the same way. Children love the variability from individual parents, but what's important is having, for the big picture kinds of things, that consistency and predictability. Security and integrity of the family's home base regardless of whether that home base is a single domicile or spans multiple residences. I think this is really important, that adults can create a secure base for the child that spans beyond a single domicile. In the field, some of you probably know about the controversy about overnights for infants with a family that's separated or divorced, and is that bad for infants? And it's probably bad for infants if the adults are fighting tooth and nail about whether the child's allowed to be at two different houses and the child's in the car on the way over and there's stress. But for adults that are working well together, babies are incredibly adaptable. Toddlers are very adaptable, and children can become very acclimated to a life situation where they are spending time in different places. It's not about that crib with that person that night. It's more about the context in the background, about how well the co-parents are working together to help provide the glue and the continuity for the child. And so I really think that, I learned a lot about reading in graduate school what post-divorce European American families can learn from African-American family structure. Margaret Crosby Burnett at the University of Miami was talking about how for Black children, there often have been multiple domiciles. And when they went to the grandmother's house, that was home. The child wasn't being plucked up from their family and sent away. It's like the family relationship network ran broad and deep. And the important thing was the extent to which the adults were collaborating and working well together on the child's behalf. And so kids are adaptable, but if there's not the communication, support, solidarity, coordination between the grown-ups, you're going to see difficulties. So again, very, very child-centered view of co-parenting. The last one, accurate attunement to the young child's fears, needs, wishes, and sensibilities. When I first started doing this presentation and explanation of co-parenting two decades ago, this last slide was not on there, but we did some work with incarcerated moms who came back home, whose kids were being looked after by maternal grandmoms while they were away. And we had, some families. It was very interesting to us. We saw camaraderie. We saw, lots of, getting along well together by the two women. Looked like there was great solidarity. But the issue, as we noticed, was that neither woman was really attuned to the child's sensibilities. So it's not just the cooperation and communication between the adults. It's child-centered. So if the adults are not plugged into what the child needs, what's going on with the child, not talking together about that, not catering their particular interventions to this child who may have different needs than this sibling, co-parenting is not really going so well. So again, the accurate attunement part as the communication between the adults is so important. These four are the things I'd kind of like to stay with you today, because I think that these are characteristics of any positive co-parenting system for any child. This is what children need. This is what grown-ups can do to try to help support children's social and emotional development. Okay, next slide, please. I also want to spend a couple minutes lingering in this slide to talk to you a little bit about the importance of triangles. When we started doing our work on co-parenting back in the 90s, there was not really a co-parenting field to speak of, but some of the early work we did was intended to document the extent to which co-parenting solidarity had an impact on children's social and emotional development. And from that point, where we were studying the families that had always been studied, intact nuclear families, post-divorce families, unmarried families, multi-generational families, work from our Family Study Center, but many other places around the United States and around the world, robustly, we have come to a consensus that the quality of co-parenting directly affects children's social and emotional development. For a while it was marriages and parenting, and certainly those are very important components, but the co-parenting is a proximal influence and impact on kids' development, regardless of whether parents are living together or not. Related to that, the triangular metaphor, I'm going to go on in just a minute to talk about this on the next slide, but it goes without saying, every child who's ever been born in the history of the planet has had two parents. There's always been what my colleague Elizabeth Fivas in Switzerland calls a primary triangle. And so the question is, what does the functioning in that triangle look like? That's what's going to matter for the child, right? And any intervention, thinking about things from a triangular perspective, would be trying to help the triangle to function more effectively. Next slide. We operate in the field so frequently from 2+1 views, right? So, our maternal and child home visiting, we work with mom and the child, and if dad happens to be around, we grab them and we pull them in, and dad's there too. That's 2+1. That's not a three together triangular model. A triangular model is, what's going on with that? We can't start the work until we've kind of got dad in the system, right? case conceptualization, let's be talking about how dad's going to be involved. And it's an incomplete picture without dad being there in every case for every child. Now, sometimes you might discover that, in fact, dad's not around because there's been violence, there's a restraining order, there's some very dire kinds of things happening. And there are those situations where it may not be in the child's best interest to be integrating dad into case planning and conceptualization. But for the rest of the world's children, it is. And of course, in families where there's not a dad, but there's mom and grandmom, whomever the involved adults are, it's still a triangular metaphor. Who are the child's people? Who are the primary parents? But again, for us today, we're talking moms and dads. So let's stay on that metaphor. 3 together is different than 2 plus 1. How many times have you seen a file that says dad uninvolved and we move forward? For the kids, dads are there and dads are involved. And so we need to be thinking about what's the nature of the relationship. Is there conflict? Is dad disengaged? Is child not seeing the dad for a while? I mean, what is the circumstance? How can we promote that and get it better and get it moving forward? And that has to be the question. There's going to be all kinds of obstacles, but that's our challenge. Next slide. I wanted to show you this because this is the kind of the Dewey wins the presidency. This is a book that we wrote for the American Psychological Association about 10 years ago, and they sent me the galley proofs for the book. Co-parenting on the left was how they had drafted it. And I said, no, there's no hyphen in co-parenting. It's co-parenting. And they wrote back and said, no, it's not. And we had this back and forth. Some of you have heard me tell this story before. Literally, this went on for like 28 to 30 emails back and forth about what the book was going to say. And finally, the book on the right won the day, and this is the one that you all see that's out in the field now. But the point was, what we're trying to do, we're not trying to do co-parenting, we're trying to do co-parenting. The family together, surrounding the child, supporting the child. That's what co-parenting is. The metaphor of co-parenting at a distance with a hyphen, sort of metaphorically suggesting happening at a distance. For the child, they're going to feel safer and more secure when co-parenting is enveloping them, regardless of where the co-parents live and what their situation is. There's a way to do co-parenting when you're talking about military families or families where there's been a parent who's been deported or an incarcerated parent. You can still do co-parenting, and that's what we're trying to aim for to support children's emotional health. Next slide. I'm going to talk to you just a little bit in the remaining 7 or 8 minutes we have together about some work that we've been doing to support co-parenting alliances in unmarried families. There's some conversation about this yesterday, some special challenges with unmarried families. A lot of time was spent yesterday on post-divorce family systems, and certainly there's some, very important work that's underway and that needs to be underway there. And we had some conversation about that yesterday. On the front end of things, with families where the parents are not married, there's a great diversity of situations with parents, and ways of working together with unmarried parents are going to have some differences depending upon the situation, but there may also be some similarities. And I want to talk to you a little bit about a model of approach that we've developed called focused co-parenting consultation. Next slide, please. This is a model that was initially developed for work with 2-parent families that were not separated, not divorced, not unmarried, but to do work when there were some things going on, child behavior problems. We run a clinic, an infant family center here at USF, where families can come in, and we have a family systems wrap as parents bring their infants, toddlers, little kids in with challenges they may be experiencing with them, and we take a co-parenting approach to all of the cases, even if we end up doing dyadic therapeutic work with one parent and child. It's always within this family system frame. The model, we then developed a model for multi-generational families, families where there were some substance abuse issues and moms were in a residential program. Developed one for post-divorce families. The work I'm going to talk to you about over the next few minutes is work that we've done with unmarried African-American families living here in St. Petersburg, Florida. Regardless, the focused co-parenting consultation approach is one with 3 phases. First phase is the consciousness raising phase to help adults understand kind of what we're talking about here today, the crucial importance of co-parenting for children. Parents know this. Every family that has ever existed where there's been a divorce knows it's bad for the kids if we fight, and families can't not fight. I mean, it's just sort of like, it's not the cognitive understanding, it's really the emotional understanding. So there's a lot of hard work that goes into that first stage of heightening consciousness. The second stage is the kind of skill building that you and I would, if we went into couples therapy with our partner, it's the great stuff that we've learned from all of the experts in the field, Gottman, Markman, everybody's been doing this work for forever, in terms of how to better communicate. And then the third phase is actually working with a couple with consciousness raised, agreeing that they're going to be doing the co-parenting work and having learned the skills to then talk about some of the more contentious issues for them in their lives. And that's the place where you've got the interventionist there working with them to help do that difficult work. So you're not just sending them home having learned some lessons, but not giving them the practice in doing so. And so the question for us, next slide, is whether or not this is work that could potentially benefit families where parents were not married, but were expecting a first child together. So the prenatal randomized controlled trial that we've been doing here in Pinellas County, Florida, over the last 10 years, really, but our randomized trial has been over the last 5, is a variant of focused co-parenting consultation that was co-developed by leadership in our Black community here in St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg, I'll say a couple more words about that in a little bit, but it is a very gentrified city, as many cities in America are. You can see the asterisk at the bottom of the page. The history of redlining here has left Pinellas County as one of the counties that's the most segregated in the state of Florida. And so University of South Florida, St. Petersburg is in the midst of our one of our larger African-American communities here in St. Pete. So leadership worked together to put together an intervention that respected the sensibilities of young men and women parenting in the community, with leaders who had been doing this work for a generation guiding the development of the intervention. It was the focused co-parenting consultation model, but with the consciousness raising and so forth being really plugged into the community setting. I think that's very, very important to say. We got very clear read from leadership that co-parenting is a very copacetic metaphor within the Black community, and that co-parenting is the thing that happens. And we also, some really intriguing data, some of you know this national data, that Black fathers who are not together with their children's mothers are often more likely to stay involved in their children's life and know their kids than white or Hispanic fathers. And so, you know, this is sort of the context for doing the work. But the work was really, could we bring parents together who are not in a relationship, some residential, more non-residential, to talk during the pregnancy about having the father involved in the child's life after the baby was born in a prenatal intervention. Next slide, please. I wanted to show you just a little bit. I appreciated Joe's discussion about Baltimore yesterday and understanding how things have to be locked into your community. Pinellas County, Florida is one of the most, and I think it may be the most densely populated county in Florida. You see it in red on the map there. The maps below are maps from our Juvenile Welfare Board, with the green areas, the dark green areas being high-risk areas in our county. And University of South Florida, St. Petersburg is located in the lower right quadrant. In one of the higher risk areas. There are a few high risk areas in our county. And as I mentioned again, about 50% of our African American population in St. Pete lives in the green area at the bottom low right. It doesn't matter what maps I'm showing you, whether we're looking at low birth weight, whether we're looking at school readiness scores, FCAT reading, which is the reading test, it doesn't matter. You see that risk pattern that follows children throughout their lives. And so very, very important that the community intervention be community embedded. Next slide, please. We did a pilot study first. The pilot study showed not only, would parents come if there was a community centered intervention. The interventions took place in the community, led by Black men and women who were already actively involved in doing the work. Fatherhood personnel, home visitors, parent educators, folks who are already out doing the work would work together, a male and a female interventionist, with parents. Parents would come and then take part in the intervention. And some of the findings from the intervention are shown here. With a longer presentation time, I would show you some videos of the dramatic changes you see. 100% of you, if you watched pre and post videos and would not know which was which, could see the shifts in communication patterns from these young people who met together for the intervention. And what was especially intriguing about the work was the extent to which non-residential dads were showing incredibly intuitive parenting with their children after the prenatal co-parenting intervention. Not only were they involved, but they were involved in ways that they knew their babies and their babies knew them. We have literally dozens and dozens of pictures like the one on the lower left of babies who interacting with their parents and at 3 months postpartum knew their dads. Next slide. I know we're coming up on the end of our time. I've got just about 3 or 4 minutes left, and then we can wrap. I wanted to tell you that the important part about the first stage, the consciousness raising stage, truly is being able to deliver that in a way that it meets the population you're working with. So the kind of consciousness raising that we do with unmarried Black parents in our community, very, very different than you might do with post-divorce parents, mother, grandmother, co-parenting units, and so forth. But our our local leaders had us really having parents begin by talking about, what's happening with Black children in our community, what's happening with adults that who did and did not grow up with a dad. What is it, that you're thinking that you want to do together for your child who's on the way? So really tailoring it to, what parents knew and the intuitive wisdom they had coming in to sort of get to the heart. We would talk about this as being psychodynamic work and intergenerational work. And basically, we were really just talking to families about what do you know about the community? What do you want for your child? How can we get you together? Next page, please. This is, I think, my last material slide, and then I've just got a couple more wrap-up slides. But I did want to say to you that some questions sometimes come up when I talk about doing such an intervention and whether or not there are concerns about intimate partner violence. Quite frequently, one of the things that you'll hear from home visitors and folks who are working with moms, pregnant moms or moms with infants and children, is that they're not so sure that they want to engage dads. Is it safe? Is it a good idea to bring dad into the picture? Is it going to create more harm than good? And so one of the lovely things about this project is come one, come all. Certainly if there were families who came in and the mom did not feel safe being part of the intervention, or she reported that there had been some, very life-threatening kinds of things like weapons or strangulation during the private year, they were not eligible for the intervention. Everybody else was. Lots of, sort of screaming, yelling, some hitting, some aggression, the kinds of things that, they talk about in the military as situational aggression. And so knowing that dad's going to be part of the baby's life, you want to get in and help families to figure out some more effective ways of communicating and problem solving. So what I can tell you from this intervention that just concluded are a couple of things that I think are really important. So the first is that of the families who were referred from community agencies, community events, faith-based self-referrals, 157 families participated in the randomized trial. 138 of those 157, come one, come all, we were able to move into the randomization phase. To the other 19 who were not, it was not just domestic violence, it was mental health issues, it was, there were lots of reasons why the family could not come in and take part. But for the most part, it really was come one, come all, and about 50 to 60% of all the parents endorsed some level of psychological or physical aggression having occurred during the past year. But again, not at a level where it felt unsafe to have the family participate. There's often a question about the wisdom of doing dyadic work. What I can tell you is, as the families made it through, no cases of domestic violence, all the families came, stayed, and made it through the project. We did withdraw 5 out of 138 families because we did have some concerns about whether the dyadic work was too intensive for them. So these are some of the first data about, can you do this work? Can you do it safely? And are there good benefits? And what I can tell you, the punchline, the last bullet here, there are benefits. So we've just completed and submitted our first paper of the 3-month postpartum findings. Intervention group families outperformed control group families by showing better co-parenting, more father engagement, declines in psychological aggression in the family, and both groups showed a decline in both paternal and maternal reported depression. The piece I didn't tell you was that we did do for all families as treatment as usual, the things that we were talking about yesterday. So whatever the family's needs were, we should make sure we got, whether it's, housing, childcare, job stuff, diaper, whatever they might need, that was there for all families. We want to know, does the co-parenting intervention improve co-parenting? It improves co-parenting, it improves father engagement, it improves, aggression in the family, but everybody showed declines in depression, which is really important to the work we're speaking about yesterday. So you'll see these papers beginning to come out over the next few years. This is the first report that will be coming out hopefully a little bit later this year. Next slide. So this is a slide, I don't know, I didn't even think to ask you, Cynthia, but if the slide deck is available to people afterward, here's some of the things that I referenced today if people want to go take a look. Next slide. These are a couple things I pulled together because the conversation yesterday got me to thinking, okay, so if you wanted to go out, because the big question you hear is like, okay, so we got the dad, but mom doesn't want to do co-parenting. Now what? How do we make that work? So these are some things not from me, but from others who are struggling with that issue and have put some really good stuff out there. The first one is a very nice brief that Nigel Van wrote for the Fatherhood Clearinghouse, National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse, and that's the link. Below it is a really nice activity that can be used in groups, helping to sensitize parents to child-centeredness in co-parenting that was developed by Pamela Wilson. And again, by clicking on that, it takes you directly to that link. Last slide. And this is just our group. This is our team. What's very important to us is that, number one, we reflect the population that we work with. And so, we have a very nice diversity, not just in terms of racial and ethnic background, but also in terms of men and women. This is work that really needs to have not one guy in the thing, but as many men as possible, talking together, advising, bringing to bear. If the women are going to be doing some of the direct work with moms, you want them talking to dads. So we try to emulate in our work what we're asking parents to do, so we can have some of those challenging conversations internally and then help parents to support their kids in the work that we do. Okay, I know I went over by a few minutes, and thank you for tolerating that. And take a few questions if there are any. Okay.
Well, James, thank you very much for that. And you packed in a ton in that amount of time. So we really appreciate that very much. And, as always, what you have to offer us is just invaluable. And there was several questions that were coming in on the chat and questions that I have for you. And do want to clarify, however, that your slides will be made available. This is being recorded. And so folks will have access to all of this moving forward. So just to make sure that is, people can rest easy with regard to that. So the idea of the triangle, I just think, is one of those issues that's so simple but profound. And I really appreciate you introducing that. I know that Kathy Eden, who's someone that both of us know well, she used to say, you're bringing a two-person solution to a three-person problem here when you're only focusing on the mother and child, or even sometimes just focusing on the mom and dad and not bringing the child in, or dad and child. So this idea of thinking about it as a triangle, I'd just like you to kind of reiterate how unique that kind of is in this field. And, how did you get there to let the field understand that this is really the important triad that we're looking at, and dyads and singles is just not going to cut it?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that there's a couple different answers to that question, and I want to definitely pay homage to my colleague Elizabeth Fivaz in Switzerland, who I alluded to a little bit earlier. She and I, back in the mid-1990s, were doing the same program of work on two different continents, and we didn't know each other at all. And we were pursuing some very, very similar work, and we met each other at a SRCD conference, I think in the late 90s, and became fast friends and have traveled through time together. Their work is absolutely extraordinary, and I did learn quite a great deal from them, because I like the way you asked the question of me. Sometimes we'll focus on the grown-ups, but the child's in there too. It is a triangle. All three members of that triangle are contributing. Fivaz would show me how the baby's behavior would influence the mother and father. And we've got some gorgeous pictures, some that we've published from that last study, of how babies are coming to know their dads. They're non-residential dads, but they're there now, present in their lives in those first 100 days, and then we bring them together to do a Lausanne Trilog play assessment, and the babies know who dad is, and they're greeting him, and they're touching his face, and they're drawing him in. The babies are contributing to that triangle, and we watch the mothers. We hear about gatekeeping all the time, right? So we're watching the mothers, and as the baby bids to the dad, is the mom going, stop it? No, the mothers are smiling, they're enjoying it, they're supporting that bond in families where the co-parenting work has been done. They're valuing dad's involvement. That doesn't mean that they're not going to argue in the cab on the way home about some, money issue, but in terms of the family, we're putting the family together by doing early interventions in this way, rather than trying to come in years later. And Eleanor Maccabee wrote at one point, trying to get parents to co-parent post-divorce when they never did pre-divorce is, almost an impossible task. So we want to be getting in there early, raising parents' consciousness and helping them to understand the impact on the child. Second thing I say about triangle, rather than, family, every child within the same family has a different triangle.
Yeah.
Right? So every sibling has a different relationship with mom and dad. Same mom and dad, and they're buying the same groceries, and but the relationship, the emotional relationship in that triangle is different for each kid within the same family. So it's almost like you can't decouple it. And so much of the co-parenting work that I review, and one of the challenges I have, I've learned a lot from contributors in the field, and it's gone in remarkable directions. But when you talk about dad's co-parenting or mom's co-parenting, and then, mom's asks the stuff, and then mom does the self-report measure, dad does, and dad does the self-report measure. Occasionally you'll, do some kind of a validity check to see if mom's agreeing with what's happened over here in your study of dad. You've already deconstructed the family. The family is the triangle, and that needs to be our metaphor. And certainly in treatment planning, where's dad? We can't start the work without him. and communicating to parents that your model is a model that you want to know all the important adults. It's even broader than this, but it's a dad conference, but we do an eco map in the beginning just to tell you child's in the center, and we ask the parents to draw lines to all of the important adults in their life to whom they have a heart connection. And what's really interesting is if you give two different co-parents that, and their eco maps look different. Somebody's closer, somebody's farther away, somebody got left off of this one, because we're asking it through the child's eyes, right? And the adults can't even answer the question through the child's eyes. That's interesting. That's something we're talking about. So anyway, I thank you for letting me ramble on a little bit there.
Not at all. And you actually set up a question that your former student, Chris Brown, who runs the National Fatherhood Initiative, asked in the chat for you to talk about whether a father figure can be part of that triangle if the father is no longer part of this triad. What does the role of a father figure look like within that triangle?
So, I mean, I think that's every child, each child, the answer might be different for different kids, right? So it just depends on this child, like, what is the significance of that person in that thing? I mean, I can certainly tell you that for many children, the surrogate dad, the foster dad, the fictive dad, whoever it might be, becomes dad. And of course, as you know, the younger the kids are, the more likely, if the dad's going to be a stable presence, the child will accept them, love them, take them on, not distinguish that dad between biological dad. So yeah, I think that Chris's question becomes more challenging when the child's biological dad is in the picture, and now there is a stepdad or a new figure, because most men will tell you to go into get their kid and then see their baby bouncing on another guy's knee. That's like that really creates a lot of stress. So that's the place too, though, where the co-parenting system is now broader, right? So it's not just 3, it's maybe 4, or if dad has his girlfriend. So it's more people. And again, the co-parents got to be communicating, collaborating, talking together, and if they do that, it'll be fine. And if they don't do that, it's not going to be fine, right? So I think that's the place really. Our job is to assess who's in that child's circle, what role do they play, and then once we get a read on that, then we can see how those folks getting along and how are they co-parenting this child, and is the child deriving benefits or being harmed by the way they're working together. Yeah,
and there's another question that had to do about basically kind of when does this triangle form? There are many programs that try to support families during the prenatal period. Most of those are focused on the mother during that period, but we know how important father engagement is during that period is for a healthy birth, for a healthy mom, for a healthy post-perinatal period. So when does this triangle form, and are you aware of any programs that can really effectively bring dads in during that prenatal period?
So I think our program was pretty effective, but that was a prenatal program. But I'm just kind of goofing. Yeah, there's some really good work out there. And my colleague Regina Kirsten Hogan co-edited a volume with me earlier this year, and maybe some of you on this call even contributed to that volume. I think I saw a couple of attendees who have chapters in that book, and it's called Prenatal Family Dynamics. And it's out. It's a 2021 publication. Researchers from I think 4 or 5 different countries who are doing that kind of work in really creative ways. In some ways, it's a preposterous idea to think about a triangle prenatally because the baby hasn't been born yet. But even there, people are talking about ultrasounds and genograms and babies kicking and developing dialogues and stuff. So some really interesting stuff. But without a doubt, I mean, I think that there may be a point where it's too early. When we started the Figuring It Out for the Child project, and we through the doors open, you're trying to reach out to moms and dads during the first trimester or even early second trimester before the moms start a show, before there's movement. That may be a little bit too early, to kind of sort of be talking about the family. But I think once you're getting the movement, once you've got the ultrasound, once, it becomes more real, and it certainly becomes really real for dads as they're moving into the third trimester and thinking about support, that's the time to get them in there. And what I can tell you is, and folks on the call all know this, right? Folks on the, both moms and dads are thinking about the parenting they got during the pregnancy. They're thinking about the parenting they got, and there's, both carrying forward the good things, making sure my baby doesn't get the bad things. The ironic part is that both of them want to have better co-parenting than they got potentially, right? Yeah. But if she's trying to make sure this happens and he's trying to make sure this happens, and they're not talking to each other, they're ironically recreating the same kind of conflict because they're not talking. So you've got to get them talking. And I will tell you the one beautiful thing in the citation there is a paper published this year by my colleague Catherine McKay and the rest of us on what do parents actually talk about in these prenatal interventions. So it's common themes that are talked about. And you'd be surprised. They're not in there talking about child support. They're not in there talking about the stuff that we think that they ought to be talking. They're in there talking about other very, very different things. And a mom might be talking to the dad about how sad she was when her dad would drop her off at the soccer field and drive away when all the other dads were staying there watching their daughters play. And she doesn't want him to have their daughter feel that way. So it's not like she's talking about her issue, but she's talking about it to her baby's dad. Her dad's hearing this from baby's mom. Together, they're putting together a commitment to co-parent the shared child, whether they live together or not, whether they've got new partners or not. It's their child, it's their baby, and that's the window, that prenatal window. So great question, whoever asked it, and it's not too early at all. I think it's the right time to be thinking about it.
Yeah, I really like this idea of this plan of how you want to jointly commit to raising your children. That is so important. And you're right, from a policy standpoint, we're thinking, do you have a plan of how you're going to jointly financially provide for this child and where it's going to live and all of those things? But those bigger decisions about what really matters to you just seem so important.
And
I know that, oh, please.
Clearing the way for dad to be involved. What are the obstacles to co-parenting? And you're talking about those before the baby comes. So grandma doesn't want dad coming around, or dad says to mom, I got this one, but the other two, they're yours. Or mom says, I don't want him going over your house because your little brother smokes pot. Whatever it might be, there are obstacles to co-parenting. Talking about those before the baby comes allows for greater father engagement.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time, but I know that this conversation could go on for much longer. You've contributed so much to the field and our understanding of how to do this. And I wanted to make sure to emphasize to folks how unique it is that you have invited parents that are actually experiencing conflict into your program and have demonstrated that you can help them. We have to be, as you said, extremely mindful of safety. And you're highly skilled, and your program is, you're a psychologist. This is not just a run-of-the-mill anyone, doing this off the street. You've thought about this a lot, but it can be done. And the words that you said earlier is they are going to be around the child. So maybe it is the right thing to do to try to make it as healthy and safe as possible. And so I just really encourage people to learn more about your program because of that. It's, lots of reasons, but that one in particular, and its focus on listening to community voice. But thank you again for sharing with us today. And I know that you'll probably be following along with the rest of the day, and we're going to transition now into our panel where we're going to talk about co-parenting.